Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share, subscribe to the channel. You know, we need your support. We're an independent outfit. We really don't have sponsors. We're not state-backed, and we like it that way because it means that we can say what we want and be independent, short of the algorithm control. So that's why we need your support. Like, share, thanks, subscribe. And with me in the studio, I've got Chris Williamson, one of our early friends of the channel, who contributed at almost our birth, and we had some wonderful discussions, and he's back for more today. And what could be a better opportunity to do it, this analysis with Chris, than when Keir Starmer is unceremoniously dumped from the Labour Party, and now we have Mr. Farage, who's had his comeuppance. I can't say that I'm not giggling with glee. I'm afraid that I have made it pretty obvious that I don't like their politics. But today we're going to discuss why their politics may be so objectionable to so many, because a lot of people clearly are unhappy with what's going on there. But there's a lot more to unearth. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's been good to be back on the show with you again.
Welcome. And of course, Palestine Declassified is still going strong. So do log into Chris Williamson and his show and support Palestine Declassified. Again, some great stuff that is there, a real encyclopedia to open your eyes on so many issues which are buried and hidden, with Professor David Miller often being there as well with some fantastic research and analysis. So that's the plugs done. On to the real business. Keir Starmer. Nobody seems to like Keir Starmer. Even the Labour Party was not happy with him, clearly. That's why he's out on his Todd, as they say. You know, I don't know whether to start with him or Farage. Let's start with Farage, because we haven't really done a lot on him. There were these jibes that Nigel Farage always runs before the real deal is started. You know, just when he's managed to effectively con half of the British public into voting for his party on the local front with a huge success, it has to be said. And on one issue, really, immigration. I can't think of what else the Reform Party stands for. You might be able to educate me today, Chris, but let's deal with why Nigel Farage is out and what's really going on in the background there.
Yeah, I'm not so much sure that it's the success of Reform and Nigel Farage, more a failing, really, of all the political parties. People are really fed up, I think, with the status quo and are looking around for an alternative. And I think people mistakenly are searching around and thinking that maybe Reform UK might be the answer as a sort of an anti-establishment entity, but of course they're not anti-establishment at all. I mean, you know, Nigel Farage is a pillar of the establishment, if truth be told. You know, privately educated, former commodities broker, multi-millionaire, apparently owns several houses, recipient of substantial donations, which of course is multi-million pound donations, that is, as well, which has caused his difficulties at the moment. Hangs out with billionaires and the President of the United States of America. You couldn't get a more quintessential sort of establishment figure, frankly, than Nigel Farage. Now, as you say, you know, some people are saying, you know, maybe he's jumped before he was pushed. He's run away from the consequences of this inquiry, which is being mounted into the fact that he didn't reveal the donation that he received. He argues that he didn't need to actually reveal that information. Obviously, the parliamentary commissioner, will make a determination on that in the fullness of time. The irony is, of course, although, you know, some people are saying, you know, he's running away from the potential consequences of that, assuming he does fight this by-election, the likelihood is he's going to get returned, because apparently, apart from Carlton Binface, there's nobody else apparently in the field at the moment, although there is a rumour that Carol Vorderman might throw her hat into the ring, and that might be an interesting contest. I suspect that Farage would still probably come through. But of course, the reality is he might then be faced with yet another by-election, because if the commissioner rules that he should have declared this donation that he received from the Bitcoin billionaire, and if he's then suspended from the House for more than 10 days, he could face a recall petition. And if 10% of the electorate in Clacton, which is a moot point as to whether or not they could get 10%, but if they were to get 10% on a recall petition, then there would be yet another by-election. So it's kind of interesting times, and I know that the other political parties, or mainstream political parties, are saying that they're not going to join in this stunt of Nigel Farage. I think, in my opinion, the main reason why they are not fighting the by-election is they think they would lose it, and that would obviously be a real boost for Nigel Farage and reform, and so they're trying to ridicule him, and so far I think that they've succeeded in doing that. But yes, interesting times, and we'll see. I think he's likely to be returned, but it might not be the end of the story.
Yeah. So, I mean, more concerning to me is individuals come and go. I mean, they are important in the sense that good leaders can galvanize the confidence and trust of the population. They can condense narratives in their own personas, and people end up trusting them. And it seems as though that kind of leader is in really short supply in politics in general. In fact, the Labour Party had to bring back Burnham from the wilderness out in nowhere, and they actually literally had to create a post for him in order for him to come back and be the leader of the Labour Party. Presumably, we're on the cusp of that happening. This kind of systemic issue. I mean, first of all, the idea that the individuals and the personalities in politics matter anymore, the way they perhaps did when Edward Heath and Harold Wilson were around, or even Tony Blair and the Thatcher periods. I'm not sure that we've got that kind of independence within the parliamentary circles. Is it now more a case of things are so tightly managed by the men in suits behind the scenes that actually most of these leaders are irrelevant? Whether they come and go, it actually makes no difference to the reality of politics in Britain, that never changes and it's controlled.
Well, I think that what we've got now is there's a uniparty situation, to be honest with you, Mohsin. I mean, the Labour Party, Conservative Party, Reform, Liberal Democrat, although people might think that there is substantial differences, I mean, if you actually analyse their economic prospectus, their foreign policy agenda, it's very difficult to get a cigarette paper between them. They're all committed to neoliberalism. They're all committed to a kind of imperialist foreign policy agenda. The arms sales, the economic sanctions, the imperialist wars. There's a kind of political consensus in Westminster at the moment on that, and the difference really is very limited. And I think certainly the sort of independent thinkers that you talked about from the past, on both left and right, do no longer exist in the Houses of Parliament, as far as I can tell. I mean, great figures like Tony Benn on the left, and people like Keith Joseph on the right, Enoch Powell, dare I say. These people were, I wouldn't necessarily agree with their politics, but they were big figures, big thinkers, and they just simply don't exist. I mean, the comparison really, they're sort of political pygmies, it seems to me, at the moment. And so, yeah, I mean, it's. I think that's the problem. I mean, I think yes, there are certainly forces in the establishment that are basically pulling the strings, irrespective of who's in. But because they've colonised really all the political parties in that sense. So, there is no real difference. I mean, and Andy Burnham is now likely to be crowned as the new leader of the Labour Party and therefore become the Prime Minister. Look, I like Andy Burnham. I mean, I know him from when I was an MP previously. He was a member of Parliament when I first got elected back in 2010, and then I lost my seat in 2015. And then by 2017, when I got back, he'd left to stand as the mayor of Manchester, the Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester. So I didn't work with him then. But credit to him in a sense. He didn't join in the coup against Jeremy Corbyn. He remained loyal. Now, some people say he did that because he had his eyes on the mayoralty in Manchester, and if he'd have kind of joined in the coup, he might not have got that nomination. But I like to think he did it for honourable reasons, not for self-interested reasons. But looking at his economic agenda, his political outlook, I mean, he's saying some good things, but he's sort of, in a way, speaking out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, he's saying he wants to end 40 years of neoliberalism. I mean, actually, neoliberalism has really been going on a bit longer than that, but let's still take him at his word. But then in the next breath, he's saying that he supports the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has imposed on the government, which is neoliberalism 101. If you're going to stick to the fiscal rules, it's going to be impossible, frankly, to do the sort of things that Andy Burnham says he wants to do. And he's using his words carefully when he says he wants greater public control. He's not saying public ownership. And I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve what he says he wants to achieve in terms of lower, water bills, energy bills, and so on, and transport costs and so on, if he's simply relying on essentially the same regime that we've got now. I mean, we've got a kind of regulatory regime at the moment, and it's totally unfit for purpose, isn't it? The problem you've got is when you're relying on the public sector to deliver essential public services, essential utility services, the overriding priority of the board of directors of these organizations is this fiduciary duty to return a profit. And so that's their first priority, not public service, it's private profit. And therefore they do cream off, as we know, and we've seen it in the water industry, we've seen it in all the privatized industries. They're creaming off a dividend for the shareholders. It's the profit motive which is the key thing, rather than public service. So, I think you've got to go down the road of public ownership. Now, I'm not arguing that we should socialize the entirety of the economy. I think in terms of just looking at the way in which the economy is organized in China, for example, Mercy, where there is a kind of mixed economy, but irrespective of what you think of the overall Chinese system, if you just take the economic system that they have there, yes, they do have a private sector, but the national interest is put to the fore, and so any private organisation, any private company which is no longer serving the Chinese national interest, well, they're sort of brought to account very very sharp order, as it were. And I mean, they've seen an enormous improvement in the living standards of the Chinese people. And you need to think where they've come from. A very underdeveloped economy, at the time of the revolution in 1949. But they've really massively transformed the economy there now. The infrastructure is outstanding, and yes, there's still lots more to do. But you look in the cities in particular. I mean, it's a sight to behold. I mean, look at they're world leaders now in alternative technology. Clean green energy, in electric vehicles and so on. I mean, these BYD vehicles. I don't know if you've seen them. I mean, they're incredible. I went for a test driving one actually a couple of weeks ago. I mean, they look fantastic. They drive beautifully.
Yes.
And me, and as a vegan, actually, it's one of the great selling points for me was that they've got vegan. They actually promote it as their upholstery is vegan leather. They say,
Wow.
So that's great. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good model to probably try and emulate a wee, but you're not going to achieve that, I think, with what Andy Burnham is talking about doing. So it's one thing to say you want to make a change, and he's certainly a better communicator than Keir Starmer. It's not very difficult to actually be a better communicator, frankly. It's a very low bar. But look, Andy's a very likable guy. He comes across well, from the north and all the rest of it, and so that will stand him in good stead. However, if he doesn't deliver, I think people will become pretty cynical fairly quickly. What I think he might do, he might sort of tinker at the edges. There'll be a bit more tinkering, and that, in some ways that'd be welcome. But what this country needs is fundamental reform, in my opinion. And I think I was making this point when I was last on your show, Mostly when you were first set up, we were talking about, I think, the sort of alternative economic agenda that we should be pursuing. And given that Britain, as we were saying then, issues its own currency, so it can never run out of money. It's the fifth biggest economy in the world, and yet we have nearly 50 million people living in poverty. That's an absolute outrage, and we should not tolerate that. And we should have the best public services. We should have the best infrastructure. We should be able to eradicate poverty in this country. And that's not some sort of lefty pipe dream that's kind of beyond the ability of the country to deliver. We could deliver it. Indeed, we were on the road to delivering just that, actually, although I think we could have gone a lot further. From 1945 right the way through to the mid-1970s, that sort of post-war consensus, which saw economic inequality narrowing. It saw, a bigger proportion of the national cake increasingly going into the pockets of the working class. And, we saw massive improvements in the housing conditions for people. We saw huge improvements in public services, the introduction of the welfare state, the National Health Service, and all the rest of it. So all these things are doable and possible. It just takes political will. But the sad thing at the moment is, the tragic thing at the moment is, there is not a single mainstream, if I can put it that way, political party, including, if I include Reform as a mainstream political party, that's actually offering that. They're just not. I mean, and I know a lot of working class people are looking to Reform, thinking they are this anti-establishment political party. But truth be told, they're Thatcherite, 2.0. I mean, more Thatcherite than Thatcher. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. And the failing, I think, of the left has been the inability to get that message across. And the failing of the left has been the inability to collaborate and work together to build a credible alternative. Now, as you know, I'm a member of the Workers' Party, and I'm very keen for us to kind of collaborate and work with others. But there seems to be an unwillingness to do that, unless you are absolutely 100% in agreement on every dot and comma. Then a lot of people on the left don't want to have anything to do with you. And one of the great dividing points, of course, is the whole emphasis around identity politics. And some people there are lots of people in the working class who are socially conservative, and people on the left who are socially, I'm not myself. But I think we've got to find a way of being able to kind of rub along and, just find common ground in certain areas. And as I've been saying till I'm blue in the face, let's agree where we agree and just have fraternal disagreements where we don't. And on the big issues, I think we do agree. On the need for fundamental economic reform, I think we do agree about, bringing the utilities into public ownership, about removing the private sector from the delivery of public services, from making sure that we can enable working class people to go to university if they wish to do so, by removing those barriers of tuition fees and all the rest of it. Let's have free education from cradle to grave with support that. And perhaps in conclusion, before you come in with another question, Mohsen, I think the other thing that we are falling down as a society, as a country, and indeed this is really right across Western Europe, is we are not encouraging young families to have children, young couples to have to start a family. I mean, people are penalised for having more than two, or were anyway. I mean, I know they've kind of scrapped the cap that there was on the two-child benefit cap, but we should be encouraging people, I think, to have children, because in the longer term, this is going to create huge difficulties for the society to function if we haven't got the people to fulfil the really important roles that need to be done in terms of social care and all the rest of to make a good society.
You've raised lots of really, really important issues, and they're largely an attack on neoliberalism, which transcends, I think, it seems to transcend party politics. It seems to permeate Tories, Labour, Reform, and the Greens, actually. It seems as though in terms of economics, they all seem to be, as you say, singing from the same hymn sheet. So how many times are they going to try and repeat the same exercise and get the same result, and then keep trying to repeat it? But it seems as though we've got through how many prime ministers, 6 or so, within a matter of a few years, and they've all fallen, it seems to me, on the economic knife. Actually, they fall on the basis of the failure to actually, make Britain prosperous again, at least, or make the ordinary people have basics, not even just give them luxuries. It seems that having a decent wage, being able to support a mortgage, being able to run a family, being able to sort of have those simple things like a holiday or the basic amenities, even those people are having to do 2 jobs at pretty decent salaries before they can even enjoy those basics. So something is very wrong in the 5th largest economy in the world, as it was. I don't know whether we've fallen even further yet. But to drive back to Starmer and his failures, do you think that is why people basically, voted with their feet and marched away from Labour in those local elections? Because that's what's essentially rattled the Labour MPs and then has precipitated his downfall more than anything else. Or am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I mean, look, he's a liar. I mean, let's put it boldly and start a bit like that. The man is a liar. I mean, he got elected as the Labour leader on a range of different promises, the vast majority of which have not been implemented in any way shape or form. I mean, he talked about changing corporation tax rate. He'd not done anything on that. He said he would, sort out the top rate of tax. That's remained unchanged. We're going to scrap universal credit. That's still, in fact, universal credit's been expanded. On the green agenda, he promised a Clean Air Act. There's been no legislation since 1993 on that. He was going to be a force for international peace and justice, and he's been supporting NATO's proxy war in Ukraine. He's, as we know, been facilitating the genocide in Gaza, supporting Israel. I mean, he did say he was a Zionist or supported Zionism without qualification when he was standing for the leadership back then. Promised public ownership of the utilities. No action on that at all. In fact, quite the reverse, pushing back against all that. Talked about ending outsourcing in the NHS and across local government, and indeed, for that matter, I believe in the justice system. No action being taken in that regard. I think the only areas in terms of public ownership that we are sort of beginning to see is that as the rail franchises are coming up for renewal, apparently they're being brought back into public ownership. He said he was going to scrap the House of Lords. Didn't do that, and then he's gone on this very authoritarian agenda, which people see, arresting elderly people. People in their 90s as terrorists for holding up a sign, for God's sake. And this is absolutely absurd, and people see this and they think, what the hell is this all about? Cutting the winter, scrapping the winter fuel allowance and then reintroducing it, but means testing it. No need at all to do that. I mean, look, the guy is essentially a neoliberal ideologue, very much in the pocket of the corporate sector, very much in the pocket of the Zionist lobby. Indulged in racist, rhetoric, talking about Britain becoming an island of strangers. Then, of course, there's all this kind of sleaze, the freebies, Lord Alley, and all the rest of it. And things like the utilisation of the National Security Act that was obviously introduced originally by the Tories. I think it was in 2023, which has even been used against Palestine Declassified. We've lost access to the studio where we used to record the show in London on the basis that the proprietor of the studio had a threatening letter from the Home Office threatening up to 5 years in jail for having the temerity to host Palestine Declassified, would you believe? I mean, I think they were flying the kite. I don't think they've got anywhere with that, but you never know, the way we're going in this country. But it's all of that has come together, and I think people see that. And as I say, he was a leader, a prime minister. Well, he was leader of the opposition at the time, but it was promising change, and there hasn't been any real change. In fact, the change that has been a change for the worse. And people see that, and they really no time for. And of course, he's got no charisma whatsoever. That's the other thing. I mean, as George Galloway refers to him as much charisma as a plank of wood, which I think is a bit unkind to the planks of wood, actually. But. So, the guy was never really suited. I mean, he's only been in the Labour Party 5 minutes. I mean, he only joined, just before he was elected to the party. And there's been too much of this, actually. People with no history in the movement, no affinity with the movement, let alone affinity with the working class. I know he kept going on about being a toolmaker or sort of a toolmaker and all that kind of stuff, but truth be told, he's got no affinity with working class people. He's more comfortable, a bit like Nigel Farage in that sense. Rubbing shoulders with the billionaire class. I mean, he's very happy working closely, with the chief executive of BlackRock and all the rest of it, and was. Very much saying, as Rachel Reeves, the whole of the parliamentary Labour Party, talking about in terms of, they keep going about economic growth, but the route to salvation being a bigger role for the private sector. But I think this whole emphasis around economic growth. I'm not against economic growth, but the way in which economic growth is measured, the gross domestic product (GDP), is a very blunt instrument in terms of measuring economic success. I mean, what I would sooner be doing to measure economic success is to, have we eliminated poverty? Have we reduced, poverty? Have we increased the living standards of working class people? Have we eliminated or minimised, reduced, homelessness, rough sleeping, etc.? These are the things I think that would be a better measure of economic success. But GDP is not a particularly good measure of economic success. Well, and indeed, some of the problems, some of the ills facing the country, actually, like when rents increase, I mean, that'll contribute to an increase in GDP, for example. So that's not exactly a great measure in that sense.
I mean, given Starmer sold out essentially to the billionaire classes, I mean, he was quite comfortable with, as you said, Bill Gates and Larry Fink of BlackRock. They were some of the first people he entertained when he came into office. And subsequently, we've seen that, BlackRock has a massive hold even in the housing market here, increasing the people who are buying up the houses, pushing up the rates, even though we've got unaffordability amongst ordinary people. People can't buy houses. But the market is still buoyant because it seems that either foreign money or dirty money or industrial money from these hedge fund mafias is still inflating, ordinary homes out of beyond the reach of ordinary British citizens. And will somebody like Andy Burnham take the bull by the horns on this? Or is he also going to be scared of the power of City of London? Because, one of the things is if these guys turn against the interests of the banker and the money mafia classes, of course, they have something like a 30%, I read, I mean, I might be wrong, 30% hold on the GDP of Britain. They generate something like 30%. Take that out of the equation. If they took all those computers and the digits that they have sitting in the Corporation of London and that square mile, and they were to shift it to, say, Frankfurt or take it off to, I don't know, Hong Kong, that would create a dent in the British economy as it stands. And most of the high street and the retail businesses you see, or the fronts that we see, or even the big tech companies, which are actually controlling most of the economy of this country, it seems now. They employ the most people, these transnational corporations. Do you think they're holding us to ransom and holding every prime minister to ransom as a result? That the power of the city and the money that exists there, Westminster has to keep an eye on what the City of London is saying, more than being answerable to the electorate itself. And if that's the case, what can we do to break that hold? And what's the alternative vision? It may be painful initially, I would imagine, if you would try to divorce yourself from the power of the corporate elites, the Epstein class, some would call them, that there would be a price to pay and Britain would have a further knock economically. But do you think in the long run that might be beneficial for the nation to go that route?
I think it would be very beneficial for the nation to go down that route, and I don't think there would be a price to be paid by the nation. Actually, the price would be paid by these spivs who have been making money out of the, this sort of rentier system, this kind of emphasis, this kind of prioritisation, which we've seen started really by, I suppose, Margaret Thatcher turbocharged it. This kind of whole putting all our eggs in the financial services basket, and this has kind of led to massive difficulties, problems in the country. I mean, the financial sector has saw that there were bigger returns to be made from the from real estate, if you like, and so they pull a lot of the money's going into that. It produces very, very little in that sense in the country, drives up prices that you've already mentioned, and I mean we've lost. Over the last 40 years or so, over 6 million jobs in the manufacturing sector, they've been offshored to low-wage economies. But I was a bit concerned, really. I mean, Andy said, as I've already mentioned, that he wants to end 40 years of neoliberalism. But then, as I've already said as well, he was going to stick to the fiscal rules and didn't want to upset the bond market. I don't give a toss about the bond market, frankly. I mean, and I think the power resides with the government, not with the bond market. So when they talk about these bond vigilantes and so on, they rely on the government issuing these bonds. And if they wanted to play silly buggers, I mean, I've written about this actually and made the point that, if they wanted to cause difficulties, well, the government could just introduce a moratorium and they'd soon be screaming, banging at the door. So please, issue some bonds for us. Because at the end of the day, it's really a form of corporate welfare. Since the government is now basically we have a fiat floating currency in this country, as I've already mentioned. We issue the currency. It's not backed by any commodities. It's not linked to the dollar as it was under the Bretton Woods Agreement that was agreed at the end of towards the end of the Second World War, but was scrapped by Richard Nixon in 1971. But the government, because it issues a currency, it can never run out of money. So it's not provisioned. Its expenditure isn't provisioned by tax income or from bond sales. And I think it was the former Conservative Chancellor Geoffrey Howe, I was just searching for his name there. Geoffrey Howe introduced the full funding rule, I think it's called, in about 1981, which stipulates that the expenditure of the government must be equivalent to the taxation which it collects. And if there is a shortfall, that shortfall must be met by or plugged by bond sales. I mean, they call it borrowing. I don't see it as borrowing. It's providing a savings account for the super rich and for the corporate sector, the banks and insurance companies and pension funds, etc. It's a blue chip, cast iron return on your safe haven for your money in that sense. We've quite a significant, I think it's about 4%, 4.5% return actually on government bonds at the moment. But it's all a bit of a kind of smoke and mirrors, really, because, as I say, that doesn't actually provision the government. When the government wants to spend money, it just simply issues an instruction to the Bank of England, which it owns, to issue the resources that it requires. The purpose of taxation is to mainly control inflation, to reduce liquidity in the economy. It also drives a value for the currency, of course, because you have to pay your tax liabilities in pound sterling. All the currency is allowable. So that's another driver. It also can address things like inequality and bear down on socially unacceptable activities like smoking, gas guzzling vehicles. Can be a tax levy on those and so on. And similarly with bond sales, the so-called borrowing, that removes liquidity from the economy, and this also helps to keep a handle on inflation. So that's the real purpose of these things, not to provision the government. Although there's this myth which is perpetuated by all the politicians. Some of them, I think, genuinely believe that because they don't understand how the monetary system works. It's also peddled by the mainstream media. So there's this myth that the way in which we pay for the public services in our country is done through taxation and borrowing, but that isn't how it's done. But of course, that helps to maintain the status quo, and it also helps to keep a lid on demands for clamping down on these super rich billionaires. And the reason why you should clamp down on them, in my opinion, through higher taxation, isn't, as I've already said, to provision the government. It's obviously, to some extent, as I say, keeping a lid on inflation, but that's a wider point. But the main thing is to limit their power. They've got enormous power. I mean, having these enormous riches gives them the ability, to buy influence in the political class, buy influence through the mainstream media, and to peddle the propaganda to maintain the status quo. And I think people are increasingly waking up, but still, sadly, in insufficient numbers. So still a lot of people buy into this notion that we have to have wealthy people in order to, these entrepreneurs and all the rest of it, to be able to pay for the services that we require. So look, if they were to try and attack the government, well, it's not like the government, if we were ever to get a kind of progressive socialist government, isn't without any defense mechanisms, isn't without any levers. And frankly, I think we could see them off. I really do. But nobody's kind of planning to, proposing to do that. And the other thing is a moot point as to whether or not there would be an attack. Now, the attack, if it came, would be, I think, an ideologically driven one, because if you think about it, I mean, we're not talking about, as I've already said, a completely socialized economy. I think there are certain areas that should be socialized, and I made that clear. That should be the utilities. It should be our public services. But when we're talking about, for example, massive improvements in our infrastructure, better road services, better rail networks, and things like that, a lot of the work that would be done in terms of the improving the roads, building the new roads, building the homes, etc., that people require. a lot of that would be putting down the railway tracks. A lot of that would probably be done by private contractors. Some of it might be done by the public sector, like we used to have the so-called direct labour organisations that local authorities used to employ. And I used to work for one myself, actually. They used to build new council houses, but also would maintain the ones that they already had. So there'd be an element of that. But there was always an element of, private sector, builders and so on. So, yeah, I mean, I think, as I say, it would be a mixed economy. And if we were to, start to repatriate some of the jobs that we've offshored in the manufacturing sector, and if we were to invest in, the new high-tech industries and maintain them on our own shores, if we were to invest more in our agricultural system in this country, there would be lots of opportunities for the private sector. So it's a moot point as to whether or not they would want to attack in the way in which the doom merchants claim they would, because there would be significant financial benefits for them as well, with the sort of economic approach that I'm talking about. So, yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm not fearful about that sort of approach at all. And I think, if Andy Burnham, which he seemed to be saying, running scared, he didn't want to upset the bond market, he said, book of the bond market. I'd be more than happy to upset the bond market and make sure, as I say, that all these kind of, the City of London, if it continued to exist, was geared to the national interest, to Britain's interest. I think one of the things that we need to do, actually, Mohsin, is to try our level best to create a sustainable, self-sufficient economy. Now, it's not possible, I think, to become completely self-sufficient, but I think we need to do a lot more to make ourselves more self-sufficient, because this globalized economic agenda has been a catastrophic failure. The sort of globalized economic agenda that the likes of Keir, Starmer, Nigel Farage, and what's her name, Kemi Badenoch, and the leader of the Liberal Democrats, what's his name? Forgotten his name at the moment. But I mean, they all subscribe to a model, that really is past itself.
Chris, I mean, you covered this internal vision of a breakaway from corporate control very well, and I think that should prick up the ears of anybody who's really trying to understand why Britain's in the mess it is. But let me broaden this out, because since our last conversation, what we've had is an escalation of the war in Ukraine, which has cost Britain more money. Trump is saying, I want 5% input into militarization of Europe, and that means Britain too. So it means an increase in military spending for what I'm not quite sure. Certainly the war in Ukraine seems like something which won't benefit Britain in any great way. It's in fact, it's destabilizing the oil supplies and the gas supplies, etc., certainly from Russia. And then, of course, Keir Starmer had the bright idea of essentially covertly, and sometimes in some respects very overtly, the war on Iran. So he's now managed to, along with Donald Trump, engineer the shutdown of oil from the Hormuz, which has added to the woes of the European economic crisis even more, because more war will mean more immigration. It'll exacerbate the very thing that they're being told by the public that they're worried about. In fact, that's what public is all buying into, the idea of immigration being a problem, exaggerated or not. It's there in the minds of people, and is a major vote winner for the reform. That's the only policy I seem to see them using to win votes. The fear of the foreigner, the fear of the immigrant, and damn the facts and the realities of what actually immigration is. They don't seem to be interested in that. And of course, they also make no grumblings about the forever wars. I mean, many people seem to think that the genocide in Palestine or war in West Asia isn't going to affect them, yet they've got the entire supply chain now under threat. So Mr. Sainsbury's and Mr. Tesco, or wherever they are, and all of the nappies and the Pampers and the toilet roll that's supplied to them, I think they have something like 8 days supply on their shelves. In the stock rooms, there's about an 8-day supply. Shut that down, and you've got nothing left in the supermarkets. And when you talk about a resistance economy or a self-sufficient economy, it makes a lot of sense to me, because if Britain was actually manufacturing its own goods, that could mitigate this kind of reliance on the global supply of these things, which is what the multinationals do. And if you were to get rid of from the high street of all these big Amazons and whatever not they are, surely it would boost smaller businesses, make the old tradition of the British shopkeeper a thing again. People would start having small businesses. The agriculture that we can produce, we have large amounts of land which lies empty and is prevented from being used for supplying our natural food products. I mean, surely any sensible prime minister, any sensible government would say Britain should be self-sufficient. We should be making our own food, growing our own food. We should develop a culture of technological knowledge economy here, which we should rely on very heavily. We've still got the lead in terms of universities around that. But it seems that all the strengths of the nation and all the defense mechanisms the nation has against global calamities have been surrendered by successive governments to, again, these national crime squads, as far as I can see. And if Burnham and Farage, who look like they're still probably the most likely options for future government, aren't buying into this kind of vision of a Britain first, I'd call it a Britain first policy, then the country is being led down a path which is, it seems to me, disaster for another 20, 30 years, perhaps, if they fail to act now. Do you think there's any chance that Farage and Burnham will turn the corner, take the brave decisions that are required? Do you think there's any hope for us?
I'd love to think there was, but I really don't think there is. Certainly not with Nigel Farage. I mean, he's set out his stall very, very clearly, hasn't he, in terms of his support for the whole kind of neoliberal agenda. He's not described it that way, but he certainly made it clear that's what he wants to do, as indeed Richard Chance. I mean, they're a bunch of confidence tricksters, aren't they, really? They try to make out that they are sort of working class champions, but I mean, they're led by a bunch of merchant bankers, commodity traders, and property developers at the end of the day. These people are not working class champions, and no connection to the working class at all. Indeed, the sort of policy agenda that they want to pursue is actually very detrimental to the interests of working class people. And the only thing they've got, as you were pointing out, Mersin, in relation to their sort of policy agenda is it's the othering the kind of migrant community. It's all the migrants' fault. And yet they are supporting the very policies, and I think you touched on this as well, that actually drive migration flows. It's that hypocrisy which kind of gets me, with the likes of Farage and company. They support the arms sales, despotic regimes. They support the punitive sanctions which drive people to desperation, and they support the imperialist wars, which obviously cause absolute calamity for people, and understandably therefore people seek refuge away from that. And it would be far better, wouldn't it, if Britain were to use its good offices to, as Starmer himself said in his pages, actually, I think it was words to the play, that he would make make Britain, the British government, be a force for peace in the world. I mean, what a joke! It's absolutely a sick joke, the fact that they're actually facilitating more forever wars. It was Julian Assange who talked about the forever war, and he was talking about the killing fields of Afghanistan. He said it's not about winning the war in Afghanistan, it's about washing public money through the killing fields of Afghanistan back into the coffers of the military-industrial complex. And war is very, very profitable. It was Smedley Butler who wrote a little booklet back in 1935, former four-star general in the US Army, worked his way up from a private, wrote this book, as I say, published in 1935, called War is a Racket. And he said, basically, this is going back then, all he was a hired muscle for Wall Street, to deliver the interests of Wall Street. Now, whether Andy Burnham will lead it, well, look, I mean, he's saying he wants to end neoliberalism, 40 years of neoliberalism, but he's going to stick with the fiscal rules, and he seems to be running scared of the bond market. The people that he's appointing to his team don't fill me with confidence at all. It's very much a bunch of New Labour retreads. They're the people that actually sort of exacerbated the problems that really had been turbocharged by Margaret Thatcher in the in the 1980s. So I'm not filled with confidence. I mean, he talks a good talk, and let's see what he does. But as I say, the people that he's surrounding himself with do not fill me with confidence. And given some of Andy's comments, as I've said, about maintaining the fiscal rules, let's see. Anyway, I mean, I think there's more of a chance with Andy than certainly with Nigel Farage. But part of the problem is that even if he wanted to do that, the problem is that the vast majority of the parliamentary Labour Party seem to be handpicked by Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson. And so these are, dyed-in-the-wool kind of neoliberal new Labourites who might not let him, even if he wanted to, strike out and do more radical things. But look, I mean, talking about devolution and things like that, to local authorities and local executive mayors, etc. I mean, that's a good thing. So, we might get some crumbs on the table, but as I've already said, Mohsin, what we need is fundamental reform in this country, because if we don't get that, then I think we are, being led down the primrose path to disaster.
Well, the last analysis in the programme that I can't ignore is the Green Party. Of course, Zach Polanski has been he's been feted across the media. He was elevated and put across all sorts of screens and seemed to be a kind of rival to the Labour Party, essentially, and perhaps even a rival to the left, the traditional left. And initially, he has made a bit of a storm, and he's kind of taken the bull by the horns on Question Time and other shows, etc., and shown great acumen in terms of framing the ideas and looking credible. But then they've gone after him as well now, the mainstream media, and especially around issues of Zionism, etc., and his stand on that. Although he seems to be perfectly fine, actually, with a lot of the standard Zionist entities, but there's a confusion around what his position around that is, which is another thing which is gradually now becoming more apparent. But he immediately struck me as somebody who's almost manufactured a bit like a Mamdani in New York, a hope that's put up, another false dawn, and somebody who sort of promises real change and then ends up focusing on all the little minor issues and takes you down the little alleyways of gender wars and, all those things you were talking about earlier, the things which are almost like sideshows compared to the real issue, which is the economy, which is our foreign policy, and which is like going to dictate the welfare of the nation in the future. He seems to have gone down that tunnel. What do you think of the Green Party and Zach Polanski? What's your take on him?
Well, I think a lot of people who were hoping that Jeremy Corbyn and the Your Party initiative would take off. I mean, 800,000 people signed up to express an interest in getting involved in that. So I think there's a real appetite for something different. I mean, and that's being manifested to some extent with the support that Reform is receiving. And indeed, that was previously manifested with some people, supporting UKIP. But what was interesting in 2017, with the sort of relatively radical agenda, radical manifesto that Labour put forward in the 2017 manifesto. I mean, in the overall scheme, I think it wasn't that radical. It was basically, if you like, a return to the sort of system that I grew up with in the 1960s and 70s. And a lot of the people that voted UKIP back then ended up voting Labour in 2017. I know certainly in my own constituency, I lost my seat in 2015. In large measure because a lot of former Labour voters voted for UKIP instead of the Labour Party. But a lot of people who were inspired and hoped that the new party that Jeremy was launching last year would work out have ended up moving over to the Greens, and I've been quite impressed, if I'm honest with you, with some of the stuff that Zach Polanski has said, particularly in relation to his commentary on the economy. He seemed to be the only leader of a significant mainstream political party, if I can describe the Greens as a mainstream party now, that sort of understood how the monetary system worked. He does a regular podcast. He had Richard Murphy, who was actually advising Jeremy Corbyn in Jeremy's first leadership bid in 2015. He had him on his podcast, and so that was encouraging. Some of the stuff he said about the Zionist entity's genocide against the Palestinian people has been good. But he seems to have rode back a little bit, or at least he's not saying as much as he was previously doing on the economy. And some of the stuff in terms of the Green Party, as indeed under Jeremy's leadership, the Labour Party yielded to the absurd attacks, the weaponisation of anti-Semitism, and they backed up. I'm talking about Jeremy now, backed off, apologised, and threw people under the bus. Myself being one of them. Many others, hundreds if not thousands of others. And the Green Party seems to be following that same approach. And I know that some of the, I've spoken to some of the. Like, for example, local council candidates who were dropped at the last minute because they were accused of anti-Semitism. This is, again, the same playbook that was used by the Zionist lobby against the left in the Labour Party. And unfortunately, tragically under Jeremy's leadership, they fell for that. And it resulted in the destruction of the Corbyn project. I mean, I know a lot of people say that Jeremy's fatal error was the second referendum, promising a second referendum on Brexit, as I've described that as basically the coup de grace. But the firing squad was really the Zionist lobby. I mean, Jeremy was already mortally wounded by the weaponisation of anti-Semitism and his response to that, and his political capital had been massively diminished, I think, by that, and left him very little room to manoeuvre and assert his authority. Because I don't think that was really Jeremy's instinct to have agreed a second referendum, but he went along with that, and then that just sort of finished it off. And Labour ended up losing a lot of seats in 2019 as a consequence of that. And again, you've got the absurd spectacle, haven't you, of Boris Johnson, a bit like Nigel Farage, sort of putting himself forward as this champion of the people, as this anti-establishment figure. I mean, it's an absolute absurdity. But Labour had sort of played into their hands initially by succumbing to the attacks from the Zionist lobby. And I regret that the Green Party seems to be doing the same thing now. And people, really good people, indeed some people with Palestinian heritage who were Green Party candidates were dumped and accused of anti-Semitism, as well as some Jewish former comrades in the Labour Party who went off and joined the Green Party. People like Tony Greenstein, for example, the son of a rabbi who had been accused of anti-Semitism and historic anti-Semitism, and was suspended, and now apparently he's been expelled from the Green Party. Massive mistake. You cannot yield to the Zionist lobby. I mean, that really is the road to disaster. And that sort of fills me with dread, really. That
well, it does seem like, I mean, the Zionist question keeps coming up. They do have strong alliances with the right. That seems clear across Europe. Nigel Farage is happily in bed with most of that fraternity. It seems like they're not going to leave the Green Party alone. The Green Party will also have to kneel at the altar of those who worship Israel as an existential reality that everybody must accept, regardless of what it does. So it does seem as though British politics is infiltrated quite a lot by essentially Israelophiles, and they, by any means necessary, seem to get their way with every leader who comes into power. And they all have to, I mean, even Andy Burnham said, the first thing I'll do when I come into office is go to visit Israel. I wonder whether he'll actually do that, given that he now knows that they carried out that genocide. That'll be interesting. But he made that remark, I said, in 2015. Whether or not he resigns from that remains to be seen. But he was a member of Labour Friends of Israel back then. That might have been a tactical decision. As I understand it, he wasn't a member prior to his bid to become the Labour leader, but maybe he felt that being in Labour Friends of Israel, that would give him a smoother path to the leadership. And had Jeremy not secured the nominations, I believe that Andy would have become the leader in 2015, in fact. But obviously, when Jeremy came on the scene and was offering a completely different approach, which, the vast majority of the Labour members, and indeed the British public, when you analyse the sort of
policy agenda that Corbyn was promoting, when you ask people about that, both right across the political spectrum, people actually supported the sort of policy proposals that he was putting forward. And, it's the stuff around the bread and butter stuff, nationalisation of the utilities, scrapping tuition fees, rent controls, all those sorts of bread and butter issues, which go to the heart of a good society. People want that. I've been impressed, I say, with Zach Polanski. He's a very good communicator. He's able, I think, to pivot in a very effective way when he's questioned, even some of the difficult questions with some of his checkered past when he was a psychotherapist and was allegedly claiming that he could increase the size of women's breasts by hypnosis, etc. Even when he's been challenged about that, he's managed to take the blows and pivot back onto the sort of points that he wanted to make. And I think he could use those communication skills to actually challenge the absurdity of the anti-Semitism smears, which are being used yet again. That same old playbook. And until such time as we get a leader that's prepared to do that, we're never going to get anywhere. I mean, unfortunately, the Workers' Party is still a relatively small acorn at the moment. But were we to be in a position where we had, if we'd made the breakthrough at the last general election, which we almost did, but there's no prizes for coming second. But had we done that, we wouldn't be compromising, with the Zionist lobby, and we would be calling them out and using the parliamentary platform to expose them for the liars that they are. And that's what we should do, and that's what's needed. But of course, that would bring on more attacks. And they're very influential, very powerful, as you said. They've basically colonised the mainstream political parties, but they've also colonised, of course, the media and the entertainment industry. It's right across the piece. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is kind of borne out by fact. It's not be anti-Semitic to point out the reality of the situation. Of course, they will argue that it is anti-Semitism and so on. But of course, we've got this notion of the new anti-Semitism, which is criticism of Israel. But that's of course nonsense. I mean, I'm quite content with the Oxford Dictionary definition of anti-Semitism, which talks about hatred and discrimination, bigotry against Jews because they're Jews. That's it. I mean, and you don't need to start expanding it by saying, criticism of Israel and comparing Israel to the Nazis is somehow anti-Semitic. It's absolutely not the case. They are. But worse in some respects to what the Nazis were doing all those years ago. And, you've got to be brave. You've got to stand up. And I think if Jeremy had done that, he would have potentially gone on to become the Prime Minister of this country.
Well, Chris, as ever, you've given us a comprehensive overview, very difficult to do, and we touched on so many areas, lots of solutions in there for those people who want to really focus in forensically on what you were painting as a potential alternative vision. A great analysis on each one of the leaders that is potentially going to be there, outgoing and incoming potentially. I guess we just got to watch this space and see what unfolds. Nobody has the crystal ball which can give you exactly what will happen, because the forces in the background and, of course, natural popular influence can change things. Politics, weak in politics is a very long time, they say, and yes. Perhaps things can change overnight. And that's maybe what needs to be done. One of the things that what I worry about is the political literacy level within our country. Given that we're supposed to be an educated nation, we have a literacy rate which is, comprehensive pretty much, and we have an education system which is solid to all accounts and purposes. Yet we seem to consistently producing generations that either are ambivalent to politics. Let's not forget that 60-70% people don't even vote at the elections. So these politicians who come into power are a reflection of a minority of the public, and that's usually a senior, middle-aged majority who have old views and conservative attitudes. So maybe one of the things is that the younger people need to vote more, not be cynical, not opt out, learn your politics, understand what the economics of the situation is, understand the infrastructures. If schools don't teach you, you have an obligation to go and learn yourself, because if you don't understand the political system and you're politically illiterate, then you can't affect any change through this voting mechanism, which is already kind of rigged. But you could flip it on its head if you understood the politics, and if you went for those people, whether they're independents, whether it's the Workers' Party, who at the moment won't seem popular because they're not allowed on Question Time, they're not allowed on mainstream platforms, they're smeared by the mainstream parties. It's a loaded system, isn't it? And if the criteria is that you come onto mainstream television and you're promoted by legacy media or allowed onto political platforms with other parties, and if the criteria is that you have to conform to certain values that are there within the establishment, then who's dictating those values? Who is dictating what the parameters are of our British politics? Surely it should be an open field, it should be an open space, and the discussion should be free flow. Why can't we see George Galloway on Question Time? Why isn't Chris Williamson invited onto Question Time? What's the criteria? You know, it can't be that this X number of people follow them. That's irrelevant. There is a political idea out there that is fundamentally different from a lot of the establishment. That should be given an hearing. That's what we're here for. We're trying to fill that gap. Chris has done a fantastic job in setting the stall out. So other than our political illiteracy and our ambivalence, empowering the rich and the powerful and those who shill for them, essentially, within the existing political system. Other things are that, you know, in reality, you can easily work out that spending lots of money on wars which don't benefit us in any way is wrong. So any party that does that, surely you should vote against that party. It doesn't matter who they are. And if all of them are doing that in the mainstream, then go and find the independents and find the people who aren't voting for that. Morality and principle matter, ethics matter. Every issue that we have on economics, on welfare, on health, on social issues, the development of education, it must have the ruler of an ethical standard, a moral standard being run over it. And if a party isn't doing that, and along the way they're compromising themselves for what is ethically and morally right by the interests of foreign governments, Israel, the US, whoever you want to say, or they're being influenced by money power so that they are working for corporate interests, then that means they're not working for you and I, the electorate. So the voting system and our democracy becomes a joke and a sham. And we should object to that, because then we've got a problem with the system, I would argue. And of course, there's other things which were hinted at by Chris, which I'm going to emphasize just towards the end, because I'm going to do a special program on it. I think unless people have freedom and genuine ability to speak, the problem is these ideas will never come out. The shouting down, the shutting down, the censorship, the smearing, the labeling, and the castigation of views which have factual content, which have evidence-based, reasoning, should be there for people to access. And they shouldn't be limited by national security bills, which are rushed through within a 3 or 4 week period, because they give extra powers to the government to silence and to label and to castigate people. If the National Security Bill is going to look after the interests of Britain, is it going to look at the Israeli influence across the British government and the influence that the American government exerts, or these corporate governments? Or is that National Security Bill going to be used by the powers that be, the security services and others, to target those nations who are against the interests of corporates, against the interests of, again, these kind of American or Israeli interests? Is that what they're for? Is there really an inclination to gag those who are going to tell the truth? And I'm going to raise Iran on this one, because they're going for Iran just as they went for Syria, Afghanistan, and all the other nations in West Asia. And now we've got a national security bill, which I think primarily is focusing on the Islamic Republic of Iran. And what's the crime of Islamic Republic of Iran? The crime is that they want sovereignty, that they want their own national interests looked after, that they don't want to be attacked and bombed by nuclear powers, that they want to have their own people's right to do as they want in their own territory and to use their resources as they like. And if they don't do that, they're going to be the subject of laws that are imposed on us to gag journalists. I, as a journalist, can, or Chris, as a politician or as a human rights activist, can all be essentially picked up by the establishment now with the powers that they're investing themselves without really any authority from the people, in order to gag, silence, censor us even more so that we can't get to you the truths that we're telling you even now. That is a serious problem, because it just means that actually what they want is a fascist dictatorship or a totalitarian reality. This is what I think Chris Williamson is fighting against. This is what certainly we on this channel are fighting against. And all those who want liberty, freedom, and honesty, integrity, justice to prevail, we must fight it. We must take them on at every level when they try to erode our rights, and not just think this doesn't affect us. It will affect you. It will affect your children. It will affect your grandchildren. And I'm going to leave it on that. I've kind of given a little bit of spiel at the end because Chris has inspired me to sort of to come out with where I think the danger is. And I think if any danger is there right now, this national security bill summarizes everything that is wrong about the establishment today and the mainstream political parties, which are all going along with this. Green Party as well. They're all acquiescing and submitting to this, as are all the other mainstream parties. That is a big problem. If our parliamentarians can't push back on protecting our fundamental freedoms here, then they are a problem as much as the security services or Israel or America or the corporate companies which are pushing these laws through the back door. Chris, I'd like to thank you once again for your fantastic introduction, and hopefully we can resume and maybe look at this national security bill in more detail and the implications. We'll probably do a special program on this. But thank you for your guidance through the political system as it stands. We wait to be surprised by our mainstream parties that they might actually do something for the interests of the public and not their benefactors that seem to be lurking in the corridors of power and manipulating them into doing things which are everything except the interests of the ordinary public. Thank you for watching. Do subscribe to Palestine Declassified. Subscribe to Deep Dive Perspective. Like, share, subscribe, and thank. We need your support and really get the word out, because our voice is going to be stunted. It is censored, and we need your support to make sure that we break that censorship through your power. Goodbye.